I'm Devorah Wallen, and I'd like to share my Tea for Two, my Torah thought, for 2 minutes, more or less. This week's parsha is Seitzei, which are its first two words. The first verse states, Ki Seitzei l'milchama al oivecha, when you go out to war against your enemies, etc. As we've said many times throughout this series, the Torah can be understood on many levels. I'd like to share an insight of the Lubavitcher Rebbe from a talk that I personally heard directly from him. In the summer of 1991, a tragedy occurred when a young black boy was accidentally killed by a Jewish driver. This opened up many frightening days of racially incited riots and attacks on the Crown Heights community where I lived at the time. The day things flared up, I happened to be guiding a tour of Jewish educators from the Cage Conference. We were on the main drag of Crown Heights, Kingston Avenue, in a Judaica shop, when suddenly there was an overhead announcement telling us to exit immediately. As we left, we saw stores in emergency closure mode, and all the metal doors were coming down. It was quite a frightening sight, like a modern-day pogrom. There was noise and screaming, crowds of menacing men coming up Kingston Avenue. Fortunately, the tour bus was right in front of the store. We all got in, travelers totally not understanding what just happened. We, the guides, had been aware of the accident and the potential riots incited by particular ethnic leaders. The bus driver was told to get out of Crown Heights and go to JFK, since many of the attendees needed to be there anyway for travel. When things calmed down later on, we were brought back home. Properties had been vandalized, people were hurt, and we were told to stay indoors and only go outside with escorts. That very disturbing week was also Parshas Ki Seitzei. Midweek, the Rebbe called for a public address, a sicha. Hearing our community alarm, we all went to 770 Eastern Parkway for the Rebbe's talk. I will never forget the concepts he discussed, since it was and is truly always relevant. My fallible memory of the Rebbe's explanation went something like this, quoting the verse Ki Seitzei, when you go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem your Lord will deliver them into your hands, and you will capture their captives. The first words, when you go out to war against your enemies, not only refers to an actual war out there on a physical battleground. It's the war with the inner enemy, attacking our higher self and values. We all have a godly spark in us that must stay connected to its source. The soul, likened to a candle, is always scintillating, reaching upward. The wise and godly part of us needs to be in charge, so the Rebbe's explanation, when you go out to war, be over your internal enemies, connected and relevant to the riots. The Rebbe explained how the first words of our portion are usually translated as, when you go out to war against your enemies. The fact is that the translation is incorrect. A more accurate and literal translation would say, when you go out to war on, above, or on top of your enemies. This is a military strategy of literally and figuratively taking the high ground to have a better, more objective vantage point from above. We must not get schlepped down, degraded, and debase ourselves with inappropriate behavior, stooping to the level of our opponents. We can either react emotionally or with negativity, or we can be al oivecha, on top of, above, elevated, not lowering ourselves, falling into the vortex of baser emotions, reactivity, or violence, God forbid. Another recollection from that provocative and sad period, Mayor David Dinkins came to the Rebbe and said something like, we have to heal the wounds between our two people. The Rebbe's response was very pointed. He said, two people? We are one side. We are one people living in one city, under one administration, under one God. Sometimes our negativity bias pulls us into a bad headspace. We've been given the strength from God to use our inner wisdom to stay emotionally regulated and elevated. As Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. May God give us the strength in times of challenge and turmoil to keep our wits about us, using our wise mind, truly taking the high road of responsibility, that is, the ability to respond.